She said, "Come look at this with me for a while." The afternoon heat came off the black SUV in slow waves, carrying the smell of hot dust, asphalt, and crushed rosemary from the stone border beside the driveway. The first strange thing I noticed was not the engine ticking under the hood or the way the gravel still held the tire marks from the main estate's lunch meeting. It was the manila envelope pressed flat against Vivian Morgan's cream cardigan. She stepped out beside the driver's door with the envelope held to her ribs, the heavy iron lanterns on the guest house wall throwing long shadows across the white stucco behind her. The lanterns had been there for a century. Black iron, seeded glass, warm bulbs that made the little rented guest house look steadier than the estate it belonged to. Vivian stopped a few feet from me. "Come look at this with me for a while," she said. There was no flirtation in it, no softness added to make the request easier to refuse. Just a quiet, practical sentence from a woman who had driven me back from a chaotic lunch meeting, parked behind the guest house instead of at the main drive, and now stood between me and a front door. She suddenly did not want to enter alone. I looked at the envelope first, then at the keys in her hand. The keys clicked once against her palm, though the rest of her stayed perfectly still. "I can do that," I said. I did not reach for her hand. I did not step around her. I gave her enough space to choose the path to the door herself. Vivian's mouth moved like she meant to say thank you, but no sound came. She turned toward the oak door, and I followed, at a respectful distance, my steel-toed boots crunching over the crushed gravel. The iron lanterns buzzed softly above us, a small electrical tremor inside all that old metal. I was on the property because Alden Cross, the new owner of the main estate, had hired my firm to regrade the western acreage. The estate sat on a slope above a quiet suburban road, all white walls, old oaks, private gardens, and a decorative stone terraces that looked effortless until you knew how much engineering held them in place. My job was to preserve the heritage trees while Cross carved out his new pool pavilion, guest parking court, and whatever else men like him called improvements when they meant erasure. Vivian rented the guest house on the western edge of the property line. She ran her consulting business from there, out of 2 rooms filled with ledgers, proposal folders, and the kind of order that did not happen by accident. We had traded polite nods for 3 weeks. Mostly, she saw me with mud on my cuffs and survey stakes in my hands. Mostly, I saw her carrying mail and client binders beneath the iron lanterns. At lunch that day, while Cross talked over the zoning board and praised efficient land use, Vivian had stayed too quiet. Now she unlocked the guest house door with the envelope still pressed against her cardigan. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled of old paper, cedar shelves, and lemon oil. I stopped on the tile at the entryway, looking down at the mud dried into the soles of my boots. "You can come in, Roman," she said. "I'll stay on the tile until these boots stop trying to annex your hardwood." For the first time since she had stopped beside the SUV, a real smile touched her face. It lasted less than a second, but it changed the room. "My guest house is already being annexed," she said. "Your boots may have to wait in line." She crossed to the oak desk by the window. A chipped ceramic bowl sat near the edge, its broken rim repaired with gold lacquer. Beside it, a vintage drafting lamp cast a circle of amber light over a stack of client files. Ferns lined the sill, all of them trimmed carefully, none of them neglected. Vivian placed the manila envelope on the desk and slid it toward me. "Alden Cross served this to me an hour before lunch," she said. "It is an eviction notice. He claims the guest house sits over the historical property line by 10 feet, which invalidates my lease. He says the retaining wall has to be removed as a hazard, and the heritage oaks have to be cleared before Thursday." I took the envelope but did not open it yet. Through the window, the oaks spread their canopies over the slope like a roof built by time instead of money. Their trunks were enormous, their root flares gripping the earth below the guest house foundation. A developer could look at them and see shade in the wrong place. A landscape architect saw load-bearing life. "He cannot clear those oaks." I said, "Not without a certified root zone report, a compaction plan, and municipal approval." He said he had the report. I looked back at her. "He said you signed it." The envelope opened cleanly under my thumb. Inside was a survey map, an eviction notice, and a hazard declaration. I laid the map across her desk, weighting the corners with the gold-repaired bowl and the stapler beside the lamp. My pencil came out of my chest pocket before I made a conscious decision to reach for it. The blue survey line cut straight through the critical root radius of the oldest oak. I set the pencil point on the falsified line and held it there. I did not sign this. Vivian's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. My firm's stamp is not on it, I said, and whoever drew this radius either never studied tree mechanics or hoped nobody else had. Outside, wind pushed through the leaves. Their shadows shifted across the wall. The excavation line goes through structural roots, I continued. If Cross cuts a trench here, the retaining wall loses lateral support. The next heavy rainfall washes out the embankment. The guest house shifts first. The trees die after. He is calling the wall a hazard while proposing the one action that actually creates one. Vivian looked at the map for a long moment. Her face did not collapse. Her hands did not fly to her mouth. She reached for the ceramic bowl, adjusted it 1 inch so the map corner lay flatter, and then folded both hands in front of her. "He wants me out," she said. "I have a 5-year lease, but the fine print says the lease becomes void if the structure is proven to violate the original township boundary. He knows I cannot pay for a boundary fight while he starts demolition around me." That answered the first question. She was not stuck here by pride. She was stuck by contract, money, and a deadline with machinery behind it. "He does not need a court first," I said. "He needs a municipal permit. He needs a clean survey. He needs a licensed signature." "And he tried to borrow yours?" "He tried to forge the shape of my work without putting my name on the paper." "That is worse. I marked the correct radius around the oak symbols. You don't force a taproot, you give it space to spread. Every old tree on this slope is telling us where the boundary should have been respected." The rattling window AC unit kicked on behind me, vibrating so loudly against the frame that the lamp trembled. Vivian glanced at it, and her shoulders rose by a fraction, the kind of small surrender people make when too many problems are speaking at once. "That rattle is going to chew through your patience before Cross does," I said, pulling a small wooden shim from my cargo pocket. "Do you mind if I quiet it?" She looked at the shim, then at me. "You carry those around?" "High-end clients call them calibration wedges. Contractors call them shims. I call them the reason I have survived 3 marble patios and 1 billionaire's outdoor fireplace." This time her smile stayed long enough to count. "Go ahead," she said. I crossed to the window, wedged the shim between the AC chassis and the sash, and pressed until the vibration stopped. The room settled into a soft, clean quiet. Vivian's hand loosened on the desk. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," I said. "Cross will push back. He will try to intimidate you. He will try to fire my firm. But the boundary is not where he drew it." "How do you know?" "Because I know dirt," I said, "and I know old trees. They were often planted as living markers on township edges before modern grid surveys. The boundary may follow the drip line, not the straight line he wants." Vivian glanced out at the oaks. "What do we do now?" "We document everything. I will stop any work order that touches the root zone. You keep every letter, every email, every threat. We find the original township plat before the inspector walks the site. What if it does not exist? Then we build the case from roots, soil, slope, and code. I tapped the map once, but I need to ask clearly before I act on your behalf. Do you want me involved as a professional counter-surveyor, knowing it may make Cross come at you harder for a few days?" She looked toward the door, then back to the desk. The iron lanterns outside had begun to glow as the sun fell behind the oaks. "Yes," she said. "I want you involved, and I want every line documented. Then we start tonight." The first thing I did was take photographs of the notice, the map, the forged route radius, and the envelope. Vivian stood beside the desk and wrote a time log in precise, narrow handwriting. She noted when Cross had served the papers, who had been present, and what he had said before lunch. Her hand moved steadily until she reached the line about him claiming I had signed off. The pen paused there, making a tiny dot of ink. I did not fill the silence with comfort. I opened my tablet instead, created a secure folder, and named it by the parcel number. Then I slid the tablet toward her. "You keep the password," I said, "Not me." She looked at the screen. "Why?" "Because this is your lease, your guest house, your evidence. I can build the survey, but you hold the record." Something in her face shifted, not softened, not yet. More like a lock turning once, but not opening all the way. The next 3 days became a quiet war, fought with stakes, maps, measuring wheels, and municipal code. Cross started showing up early, always in polished shoes that looked offended by gravel. His contractors paced the edge of the guest house slope, waiting for permission to become expensive damage. I placed my transit laser exactly on the contested line each morning and reset the stakes myself. I used bright blue flags for the protected root zone, orange flags for proposed excavation, and white flags for historical uncertainty. On Monday, Cross tried to wave a skid steer toward the retaining wall. I turned to Vivian, who stood on the porch with her phone in one hand and the time log in the other. "Do you want me on the line between his crew and the windows?" I asked. She looked at the machine, then at the white oak roots breaking the soil in thick ridges near the wall. "Yes," she said. "Keep them off the root zone. I'll document everything." I walked down the porch steps and stood beside the first blue flag. "If your treads cross my stakes," I told the operator, "you enter a protected root zone under active dispute. I will file the report before you finish lowering the bucket." The operator looked at Cross. Cross pointed at the wall. "Move." The operator looked back at me. "You putting that in writing?" I already did. I held up my tablet, and I copied the city arborist. The skid steer stayed where it was. Cross hated consequences more than he hated delays. His face went tight in the way men's faces do when they realize shouting will create a record. He left without making the machine move. But by dusk, Vivian had a new letter taped to her door claiming the guest house was unsafe for occupancy. She found it before I did. When I knocked, she opened the door with the letter in one hand and a mug in the other. Her hair was tied up with a pencil, and a graphite smudge marked the side of her wrist. The iron lanterns warmed the doorway behind her. "He escalated," she said. "I expected that. I hate that you expected that. That makes 2 of us." She stepped aside. "Come in. Tile rule still applies. My boots have been improving their character." "Your boots have a criminal record." I looked down at the dried clay on the soles. Reduced sentence for good behavior? She handed me the mug instead of answering. "Black coffee, no sugar." I had not told her how I took coffee. She must have noticed from the disposable cups at the side table. The guest house had changed since the first night. The eviction notice now sat in a folder labeled Cross. Active claim. The gold-repaired key bowl held 3 flash drives and a roll of blue painter's tape. The ferns by the window had been moved away from the AC vent. None of it looked frantic. All of it looked prepared. We worked at the oak desk until the lamp made a small pool of light around the map. I overlaid Cross's survey with the county GIS layers, but the modern parcel data did not explain the old line. Vivian pulled lease amendments from her filing cabinet and found a reference to historic landscape boundaries as acknowledged in the original township grant. "That phrase was in my lease the whole time," she said. "It was buried under enough legal padding to upholster a courthouse." She glanced at me over the folder. "Is that a technical term?" "In my profession, yes." By Tuesday evening, we needed more than paperwork. The inspector was due Friday morning. If Cross obtained an emergency hazard injunction before then, he could clear the retaining wall and call the damage unavoidable. We needed a counter-survey strong enough to block him before steel touched soil. I arrived at dusk with a canvas bag of sonic soil testing equipment slung over one shoulder. Vivian opened the door before I knocked. The iron lanterns were already lit, the glass glowing amber against the stucco. "I need access to the basement foundation." I said, "The roots may have entered the soil under the slab. If we can map them non-invasively, we can show that the embankment is integrated, not separate." She looked down at the equipment bag. "Is this going to hurt the foundation?" "No drilling into concrete, no core samples, acoustic sensors only. If anything feels wrong, you stop me." She nodded. "Then come look at it with me." The basement stairs were narrow, old and honest about every year they had survived. The air below was cool and damp, carrying the mineral smell of earth behind stone. A dehumidifier hummed in the corner. The foundation wall showed patches of age, but not neglect. For 3 hours, we worked under the guest house with the steady concentration of people who had no room left for panic. I placed the sensors in the dirt channels along the inner foundation wall. Vivian sat on a wooden crate with my tablet balanced on her knees, logging each reading as I called it out. Sensor 3, depth 24 inches, density shift at 4.1. Logged. Sensor 4, depth 30 inches, interference from the west root mass. Logged. And your handwriting would lose a fight with a spider. I became a landscape architect to avoid handwriting contests. You lost anyway. The dehumidifier clicked off, and for a moment the basement held only our breathing, the small electronic chirp of the sensors, and the quiet scrape of Vivian's pencil against the log sheet. She did not flinch at the jargon. She did not need me to translate every number into simpler language. She asked exact questions, caught one mislabeled reading, and corrected the timestamp before I saw it. At one point, the tablet glare made her blink hard. I lifted one finger toward the screen. "May I?" She handed it over. I shifted the brightness to warm amber and set it back on her knee. She looked at the softer screen, then at me. "You fix rooms before people ask." "I fix irritants. Rooms take longer." "People?" I tightened the lead on the next sensor. "People get to decide whether they need fixing. Most of the time, they need better conditions." Her pencil paused over the log. The line sat between us for a few seconds, as real and fragile as the roots hidden under the slab. Around midnight, the data turned muddy. The acoustic reflections kept scattering through old stone pockets beneath the foundation. It proved root presence, but not cleanly enough to win a hearing against Cross's lawyers. I sat back on my heels and set the wrench on the canvas bag. "It is not enough," I said. Vivian looked up from the tablet. "How not enough?" "Enough for me. Not enough for an inspector who wants a clean reason to avoid political trouble. Cross will call it interpretive." She set the tablet down beside the crate. For a moment, the only sound was the basement's old pipes shifting behind the wall. "My ex-husband built a case that way," she said. I stayed where I was. She looked at the sensors, not at me. We had a consulting firm together. I brought in the clients. I built the methodology. He handled filings and contracts. When the marriage ended, he used a technicality in the incorporation papers to lock me out of the office. My name was on the work, not the building. I lost both. Her thumb pressed into the corner of the log sheet, folding it into a hard white triangle. "I rented this guest house because it had trees outside and a door that locked. I rebuilt from here. Now Cross has a different piece of paper, and somehow the same thing is happening again. The old version of me, the younger one who believed charm could smooth any damaged room, would have stepped closer too fast. He would have put a hand on her shoulder and tried to be useful in the most obvious way. I reached into my pocket instead and pulled out a clean envelope for the log sheets so the basement damp would not curl the paper. "Cross is not your ex-husband," I said, "and this is not only paper. It is earth, roots, water, slope, and public liability. He does not control all of that." Vivian looked at the envelope in my hand. "I'm going to the municipal archives in the morning." I said, "If those oaks were planted as markers, there may be a township plat showing it. If I find it, Cross's line collapses. What if you do not find it? Then we use what we have and make the strongest argument possible. What happens to you if Cross fires your firm?" I put the sensor back in its padded slot. Then my Thursday gets quieter. That is not an answer. It is the one I can give without pretending the contract matters more than my license. I closed the canvas bag. He hired me to protect the landscape while he altered the estate. He did not buy my signature. Her eyes stayed on me for a long moment. Then she slid the log sheets into the envelope, sealed it, and wrote the date across the front. "Archives," she said. "Archives." The next morning, I was at a wooden table downtown with township maps spread under a green-shaded reading lamp. The municipal archives smelled like dust, old cloth, and paper that had outlived several kinds of arrogance. I pulled plat books from 1889, 1891, and 1892. I followed references to landscape markers, drainage easements, and boundary trees until my neck went stiff and my coffee went cold. At 10:17, I found it. The original land grant was drawn on vellum, the ink faded but legible. 3 white oaks were marked as the western township line. One note in the margin identified the Guesthouse Ridge as preserved support land because of erosion risk to the public road below. I photographed every inch, requested certified copies, and slid the vellum into a hard plastic architectural tube with both hands. My phone vibrated before I reached the stairs. It was my foreman. "Roman," he said, voice tight. "You better get back. Cross brought in a rogue crew, 3 excavators. He's not waiting for Friday. He says he has an imminent hazard order and wants the retaining wall cut now." I stopped on the archive steps. Traffic moved beyond the stone railing. Someone laughed near the parking meters. The world had the nerve to continue normally. "Is Vivian there?" "On the porch, recording everything. Cross is trying to get her off the steps." "Tell the operators there is a registered historical marker dispute pending. Do not touch the machines. I am on my way." I drove back without speeding. Panic wastes turns. A good site response is like a good root wash. You do not yank at what matters. You clear the pressure around it until the truth can be seen. When I turned into the estate drive, the scene was louder than it had any right to be. 3 yellow excavators idled near the guest house, coughing black exhaust into the morning air. Alden Cross stood on the gravel with a clipboard and a red face, barking at his crew. Vivian stood on the porch beneath the heavy iron lanterns, phone raised, shoulders squared, the manila envelope tucked under one arm. I parked by the first blue stake and stepped out with the architectural tube in my hand. Cross spun toward me. "You are done here. Foster, your firm has been terminated." "I received no written termination." "You are receiving it verbally." "Noted." I looked past him to the lead operator. "Shut the machines down." Cross stepped into my path. "You have no authority." I did not move closer. "I have enough authority to make your operator part of the complaint if that bucket drops." The operator looked from Cross to me. Cross jabbed a finger at the retaining wall. "Cut the wall." I turned toward Vivian, keeping my voice calm enough to carry without becoming a performance. "Do you want me to present the technical claim when the inspector arrives, or do you want to open?" Vivian lowered the phone just enough to meet my eyes. "You present the technical claim," she said. "I will close it." "Understood." The lead operator killed his engine first. The other 2 followed. The sudden quiet hit the driveway so hard that the lantern seemed to hum louder on the wall. Cross's face darkened. "You think a map tube scares me?" "No," I said. "Municipal code does." A white city sedan pulled up to the curb before he could answer. The inspector stepped out. A tired man with sun-spotted hands, a clipboard, and the expression of someone who had seen too many property owners confuse volume with truth. "Mr. Cross," he said. "Mr. Foster, Ms. Morgan. I understand there's an emergency hazard claim." Cross launched into his speech before the inspector reached the porch. He waved the falsified survey. He said unsafe structure 6 times. He said private property rights 4 times. He did not once mention root zones, water flow, historical markers, or the fact that his own driveway sat on the edge of the disputed line. The inspector listened until Cross ran out of breath. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Foster, counterclaim?" I uncapped the architectural tube and unrolled the 1892 plat map across the hood of my truck. Vivian stepped down from the porch and placed the gold-repaired ceramic bowl from her entry table on one corner. I set my tape measure on the other. The small domestic object on the city map steadied the whole scene in a way I had not expected. "This is the original township land grant," I said. The western boundary was not drawn by a modern grid. It was anchored by 3 white oaks designated as township line markers. The guest house is inside the preserved support land, not encroaching on Mr. Cross's parcel. The inspector leaned in. I opened the tablet beside the map. Vivian Morgan and I logged non-invasive acoustic readings beneath the slab Tuesday night. The root structure supports the embankment. Removing the retaining wall or cutting these roots creates slope failure toward the public road. Under Municipal Code 402, Mr. Cross's private hazard assessment is invalid due to conflict of interest. The firm that produced it is owned through one of his holding companies. Cross's jaw worked once. The inspector looked at him. Is that true? Cross glanced toward the operators, then at Vivian. This is a business matter. Ms. Morgan's lease is invalid if the structure crosses the historical line. Vivian walked to the hood of my truck. She did not stand behind me. She stood beside the map, placed her phone on record, and tapped the boundary note with one finger. The boundary stays, she said. My lease stays, and if your crew touches those oaks, I will sign the complaint myself and attach every threat you have put on my door since Monday. Cross's mouth opened. She kept going. You used a falsified radius to serve an eviction notice. You claimed Roman signed a report he never signed. You tried to turn a protected root zone into a hazard so you could remove me before the city inspection. I am not leaving my business sanctuary because you drew a line through a tree and hoped no one would check the soil. The inspector took the falsified survey from Cross's hand and compared it against the plat map. For once, Cross did not interrupt. The inspector capped his pen. Emergency work order denied. Heritage marker review is now active. No excavation within the flagged zone until my office completes the preservation assessment. Mr. Cross, if you move those machines another foot toward that wall, I will issue a stop work order across the entire western acreage. The operators heard that part clearly. One of them climbed down and began making calls. Cross stared at the inspector, then at me, then at Vivian. The legal surrender did not come with humility. It came with a stiff hand, a hard signature, and a document the inspector drafted on the hood of my truck. Withdrawal of the hazard claim, suspension of the eviction notice pending boundary verification, and acknowledgement that any future work near the Oaks required independent review. Vivian signed as tenant and affected party. Cross signed last. His pen pressed so hard into the paper that it tore the top sheet. The inspector kept the original. Cross turned toward the main house without another word. His rogue crew followed, the excavators growling back down the driveway one by one. When the last engine faded, the guest house seemed to breathe again. Leaves moved above the retaining wall. The heavy iron lantern still burned in the late morning shade, unnecessary now, but steady all the same. I rolled the plat map carefully and slid it back into the tube. Vivian held the signed withdrawal in both hands. Her thumb rested on the line where Cross had admitted no excavation could proceed without independent review. You found the map, she said. You logged the data that made the map matter. She looked down at the ceramic bowl on the hood. I brought the key bowl outside like a lunatic. You brought a paperweight with emotional authority. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It was small, surprised, and bright enough to move something in my chest I had been keeping still for days. The inspector asked for the acoustic logs. Vivian handed him the sealed envelope herself. He wrote her name carefully on the receipt, not Cross's, not mine, hers. When he drove off, I picked up my canvas tool bag from beside the truck. My contract with Cross was probably dead. My firm would have calls to answer. The Western acreage job had just become a liability fight, and my calendar for the next month would not be pleasant. There was no professional reason for me to stand in Vivian's driveway any longer. I pulled a certified copy of the plat map from the tube and placed it on the small wooden table by her porch. Keep that inside, I said. Not in the desk drawer nearest the window. Fireproof box if you have one. I do? Good. I lifted the tool bag. I should get ahead of Cross's complaint. Roman. I stopped at the edge of the gravel path. Vivian stood beneath the lanterns with the signed withdrawal in one hand and the map copy in the other. When I asked you to come look at this with me, I thought I was asking for a witness. Her voice stayed steady, but the paper bent slightly under her grip. I did not know I was asking for a boundary. You gave me the boundary, I said. I just marked it where everyone else could see. She looked toward the open guest house door. The path remained clear between us. Nothing blocked my way to the truck. I'm not fighting a war this second, she said. I'm standing on my porch, asking if you would like coffee before you go face the consequences. I glanced at my truck, then at the iron lanterns, then at the oaks holding the slope behind her. Is this coffee part of the evidence log? It can be if you behave professionally. My boots remain a legal concern. Tile rule still applies. I set the tool bag down beside the porch step. "I would like coffee," I said. Vivian opened the door and went in first. I followed, staying on the tile until she pointed at a folded towel and told me she had already prepared for the boots. 8 weeks later, the final city inspection took place on a cool morning with no excavators, no shouting, and no red-faced developer on the gravel. The preservation assessment had confirmed the historical boundary. The oaks were registered as living markers. The retaining wall had been reinforced instead of removed, using a low-impact drainage plan my firm completed under a new contract issued by the township. Not by Cross. Vivian had negotiated her lease amendment herself. 5 years became 10. The Guesthouse boundary was attached as an exhibit, the plat map certified, the root zone protection clause written so plainly that even a man like Cross would need a headache before trying to abuse it. I arrived early with a clipboard, clean boots, and the same mechanical pencil I had used on the first fall survey. The iron lanterns clicked off as the morning sun brightened the wall. Vivian came out carrying 2 mugs. She wore a thick cream sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, and the gold-repaired key bowl tucked under one arm like it had become an official member of the legal team. "You brought the bowl again," I said. "It has seniority. The inspector may require it to sign the final form." "She is prepared." The inspector did sign the final clearance on the porch table. Vivian signed after him. She did not look at me before writing her name. She did not need permission to claim what she had protected. When the papers were complete, she handed the inspector his copy and kept the original in a folder labeled Boundary, Final. Then she turned to the small group gathered near the steps, my foreman, 2 township staff, the city arborist, and Mrs. Alvarez from the neighboring house, who had apparently been watching the whole dispute through lace curtains for 2 months and had opinions about everyone's pruning habits. Vivian cleared her throat. "This guest house stays open," she said. "My consulting work stays here. The oaks stay protected. And if anyone wants to understand how close we came to losing the slope, Roman Foster's report is in the archive folder, where it belongs." Mrs. Alvarez lifted her mug. "And the developer?" Vivian looked toward the main estate drive. Cross had not appeared all morning. "He can learn to enjoy the east lawn." The group laughed, even the inspector. After they left, the porch became quiet again. Wind moved through the white oaks. The roots held the embankment without drama, without applause, without needing anyone to force them deeper. Vivian sat beside me on the bench, leaving a careful inch of space between our shoulders. Then she reached into the folder and pulled out a small copy of the original plat map, laminated now, with the 3 white oaks circled in blue. "I want to hang this inside," she said. "Not over the desk, by the door. So everyone sees the boundary when they walk in." "So I do." I looked at the heavy iron lanterns on the guest house wall. In the daylight, they looked less dramatic than they had that first afternoon. Less like warning lights, more like fixtures that had simply done their job, night after night, making the entrance visible. Vivian set her mug on the porch rail and offered me her hand, palm up, without reaching across the space between us. I looked at her hand, then at her face. The old rule came back to me, but it did not sound like a rule anymore. "You do not force a taproot, you give it space to spread." I placed my hand in hers. She squeezed once, steady and sure, then turned back toward the oaks as the wind moved through them. Neither of us said anything for a while. The boundary held. So did we. The end.